Now up to Daf Yud Aleph Amid Beis Malahalan She'ein Al Gabav El Hashem Elokov Af Nosi She'ein Al Gabav El Hashem Elokov. So the pasuk in Dvarim is referring to someone who has no one on top of him except for Hashem, which is the king, and therefore the pasuk in Vayikra is also referring to the king himself, and that's the Nasi. Boy, Minei Rebbe Mirab Chia Kegon Ani Rebbe was the Nasi, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. Ma'al b'soyer, do I have the halacha that if I violate b'shogeg, a chiyuv karetz, I bring a soyer, like the king himself, like the Nasi? And now, again, I want to put this out there because we're going to come back to this over and over again. What is Rebbe's status? I mean, does Rebbe have a status that is political, or his status is just a religious, shall we say, Moser HaTorah? He's like a Rosh Hashiva. Amalei Reb Chia says to his uncle Rebbe, Harei tzaroscha v'bavel. You're not in control. The one in control is the Reish Galusa in Bavel. Even though Rebbe is in Eretz Yisrael, he thinks he's, Kilu, the top banana, which he is in Eretz Yisrael, but there's someone who has control over him, who's appointed by whatever Nebuchadnezzar, the Reish Galusa. And again, we're saying that a Nasi, with the special halacha of a Korban Sayer, is someone who has above him only the Almighty. Esvei, Rebbe responds to Reb Chia Malchei Yisrael. We have a brayso that says that Malchei Yisrael, Malchei Beis David had two different halachas. That at the time that the Malchus was split between Beis David and Malchei Yisrael, Elu Mevim Liatzma, Elu Mevim Liatzma, you see that there are two people who both have the halacha of a Nasi. And you're assuming, Reb Chia, that there could be only one Nasi because there's only one person who has control over everyone. So you're telling me that the Reish Galus in Bavel has control. Well, I have control here in Eretz Yisrael. Amalei Reb Chia replies, Hasam lo kaifi adadi. It was like a civil war, so to speak. In other words, Yisrael and Yehuda were governed in two different ways, and there was no control of one over the other. And therefore, each one had his head honcho. But here, in the case of Rebbe and his control as a Nasi in Eretz Yisrael, as opposed to the Reish Galus in Bavel, Anan Kaifina Luliditu, we are kafuf, we are subordinate to the Reish Galusa, and therefore we are not on the top level. Which in my understanding means, well, we'll see Rav Safra in a minute, maybe we'll wait till Rav Safra. Rav Safra, Basnei Hochi Boy, Rebbe Mirab Chia, this is the presentation that he heard of the conversation here between Rebbe and Reb Chia. Ma'u b'soyer, kigonani ma'u b'soyer. Okay, that's identical. Amalei, but listen to Reb Chia's response. Chasam, in the case of the Reish Galusa, Shevet. Shevet means he has the power of the Shevet. The Shevet, right? Shivtcha Meshantecha. You have Meshantecha, he could beat up people. But Hacha, that's only in Bavel. But here in Eretz Yisrael, what's the status of the leader of Klal Yisrael? He's only a Machokek. He'll be the final authority on Halacha. He's a Rosh Hashiva, he's a Posek, he's the Gadol Hador, but he doesn't have any political control. Right? In American constitutional law, you have three branches. You have the executive, the legislative, and the what do you call
judicial?
The judicial. So that we differentiate between legislation and executive. The executive here in our sugya is the Reish Galusa. Literally, he will execute. He's Shevet. The leader in Eretz Yisrael is legislation. He will determine the halacha. In a certain sense, it's not political. Besanya, we learned in the Brayso Lo Yosser Shevet Mi Yehuda. Ze Rosh Gola Shebe Bavel, Sherodis Yisrael B'Makel. Vatanya means I'm going to give you a support. This is all the brachas of Yaakovin at the end of Vayechi. And a mechokik v'bein raglav elu b'nei banav shel Hillel. Right, so Hillel descended from Yehuda, but he wasn't going to be the Shevet mi-Yehuda, the Reish Galus of Yehuda, Sherodas Yisrael b'makil, that will rule over the people with a rod. But rather, he's the mechokik. Like the Bnei Banav of Hillel, I'm not sure exactly why the Gemara has to quote Bnei Banav shel Hillel and not Hillel himself, but in any event, Hillel was the great Tana, and he was the Nasi in Eretz Yisrael, but it was not a political appointment. He would transmit the Torah. Now, he has a whole discussion here at the bottom, which we might not have time for, about what's the difference between Rav Safra here and what we had before. Maybe I can give it to you in a nutshell. Yeah. According to the original transmission before Rav Safra, it could be possible that the Nasi of Sanhedrin, even though it's not a political appointment, would be included in the same carbon of a Nasi, namely a Sa'ir. Rebbe was only excluded because, in fact, on the ground, he was subordinate to the Reish Galusa. According to Rav Safra, the Nasi of Sanhedrin he's not a political ruler. He's maybe a legislator, he's a scholar, but he's not a Nasi, he's not a king. A king has political power, what we call the power of the executive. And that leads us to the Mishnah here on Daf Yud Aleph Amid Beis. Ezui Mashiach. There are two ways of creating a Kohen Mashiach. One is Hamashuach b'Shemen HaMishcha, and then there's Meruba b'Godim. And as far as the special carbon of a par, in a case of Helem Dover and Shigas Maisa, the only Kohen Gadol who is included in that category of a par is Moshuach b'Shemen HaMishcha. Now we'll see which malachim needed and had anointment b'Shemen HaMishcha, which did not. And anyone who was appointed as a Kohen Gadol, but he did not have Shemen HaMishcha, would have the other opportunity to become appointed and upgraded to the status of a Kohen Gadol through Meruba Begodim. He wore the 8 Begodim of the Kohen Gadol, and he did the avodah with the 8 Begodim. Ein ben Kohen Mashuach b'Shemen HaMishcha Meruba Begodim el par habal kol mitzvahs. Number one, in a case of Helim Dovar and Shigas Maisa, only a Kohen Gadol who was appointed through Shemen HaMishcha will bring the par. And par haba al kol ha-mitzvos. So what's par haba al kol ha-mitzvos? Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, this note doesn't do it for me, but I think par habal kol mitzvahs is referring to the par helim dover shel tzibur, where Rov Hatzibur violated the Isur. 1 second, let me just see it one more time. Maybe he says it. All right. The Ein Kohen Mishamesh LeKohen She'avar. Interesting. The Mishnah says that even if the Kohen was removed from office, nevertheless, he retains his status as the Kohen Gadol, with the exception of Par Yom Kippurim. He doesn't do the special avodah of the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur, because he's like second string, he's like the pitcher in the bullpen, and he's not included in the Par of Yom Kippur. Why? Because he's a Kohen She'avar. And then we have Asir Sefer. The Kohen Gadol had to bring a special carbon every day called Asir Sefer, and the Kohen Shavar is not befall. He's not in actuality serving as a Kohen, and therefore Kohen Gadol, and therefore he doesn't bring the Asir Sefer, the daily carbon of V'zeh Shova Avodas Yom Kippurim. Since he's excluded from the par, this guy who's only Meruba God, we didn't have Shem and Mishcha, therefore he can't do the Avodas HaPar. But all the other Avodas of Yom Kippurim, he still retains his status as a Kohen Gadol, even though he didn't have Shem and Mishcha, and he's kosher to perform all those services. Mitzuv al B'sula, just like a Kohen Gadol has to marry who B'sula Yikach, he's got to marry a B'sula, so too the Kohen Gadol Sha'avar has to marry a B'sula, and Asur Malay is not allowed to almana. There's special law in the Torah that a Kohen Gadol is not allowed to marry an almana, and that applies even to Kohen Sha'avar. And there's no avelus in the case of a Kohen Gadol, whether he's a Kohen Gadol Mashuach B'Shem and Amishcha or a Kohen Gadol Meruba B'Gadim, V'lo Parim, different forms of avelus in which they grew their hair long, they rendered their garments. Umachzirin Harotzeach, right? A Gemara Makkos that we learned once that if a person kills B'shog, he has to run to Yer Miklat. He only goes free when the Kohen Gadol dies, and even if the Kohen Gadol Sha'avar dies, he goes free. Basically, 90% the Kohen Gadol Sha'avar is still a Kohen Gadol. Okay, we're going to try to see what we can do with this Gemara. Tana Rabban, Shemen HaMishcha Sha'asa Moshe B'Midbar. Now the Torah tells us exactly how much oil was used for the Shemen HaMishcha. So now the machlokis in this price is going to be, how did Moshe Rabbeinu prepare the Shemen HaMishcha with such a limited amount of olives? So we start with the Shita of Rabbi Yehuda, and then we get to the Shita of Rabbi Yossi. According to Rabbi Yehuda, Shemen HaMishcha Shasa Moshe B'Midbar Shoklim Bo HaIkrim. Right, they would boil the roots of the spices in the olive oil. Now, if you boil, roots into the olive oil, it's going to soak up the olive oil, and the olive oil is going to diminish by the very fact that you boil it. So how could it be that there was enough oil for Shemen HaMishcha that would last for generations upon generations? But Rabbi Yehuda is not bothered by that. But Rabbi Yossi is very bothered by that. Halo losuch es ha'ikarim eino sofek. If you want to just smear the roots with olive oil, it's impossible. The oil is not sufficient. And now you're going to go ahead and boil the oil in its roots? Ella, we have to find another way of Moshe Rabbeinu doing the Shemen HaMishcha. He created the Shemen HaMishcha. You would not soak the roots in in olive oil, but rather in water, and then he would pour on the shemen, and now the oil would absorb the fragrance of the spices, and Moshe would quickly remove the oil from the bowl and wipe off the oil while it's still clinging to its roots and deposit it in a flask. Rabbi Yossi, you're arguing al piderech hateva was impossible. There were many miracles that were done with the Shemen HaMishcha. Right? All the oil that they were able to get from that minimum amount of olives was 12 lugin. What did they do with these 12 lugin? Number one, they were Moshech the Mishkan. Number two, they were Moshech the Kalim. Number three, Aaron Ubanov had Mashiach during the Shivas Yemei Malum, each one of them. And yet, Kulo, the entire volume of Shemen HaMishcha, was Kayim Liyosid Lava, was still intact in the future when Mashiach comes. Shenemar Shemen Mishchas Kodesh Yezel Li L'Doro Seichem, for all generations. So there are many, many miracles. There's no way under the sun that you could come to the conclusion that this could happen. Al Pi Derech HaTeva. Tanya, either we have another brayso, so Yikach Moshe Shemen HaMishcha. Vayimshach es HaMishka ves kol asher bo Rabbi Yehuda Omer Shemen HaMishcha shel Moshe b'Midbar kama nisim nasu bo mitchil vad sof. It was full of miracles. Tchilas lo hayol shneim asar lugin. It only had a volume of 12 lugin, which is a relatively small amount. Re'ei kama yorah bolas. And not only that, when you heat it up, which according to Rabbi Yehuda, that's what we did. then the pot itself in which you heat it absorbs some of the shemen, the kama ikrim bolin, and the roots are going to absorb the shemen. And kama ha'esh sorif, and the fire will absorb some of the, burn away some of the shemen. Ubo, and nevertheless, with that very limited amount of 12 lugin of shemen, nimshach mishkan kelov, Aaron uban of kol shivas yimei mishteh, bo nimshachu kohanim gedolim u'malachim over all the generations. Afilu kohen gadol ben kohen gadol ton mashiach. We could have a whole discussion about that. The son of a kohen gadol also needs mashiach. And in parentheses, Ein Moshe Melech ben Melech. V'im Tomer b'nei Ma Moshchu es Shlomo. He was a Melech ben Melech that doesn't require Mashiach. V'nei Machlokas shel Adoniyo. V'es Yoash. Why did they do Mashiach with Yoash? Mipnei Asalya. That was his contender. V'es Yochachas. He was contended by Bnei Yoyakim. Shel Yigol Menish Shanim. And now Rabbi Yehuda gets to the punchline. The also shemen hamishchakayim liyosid lavo shenem shemen hamishchas kosh yelchem li ulidor seichem. How could it possibly be that they still had enough shemen to last for all the generations? As if to say the original 12 lugim are still intact. How could that possibly be? Zeh b'gematria shnei masor lugin hoya, and the pasuk says. I don't have it in front of me, but it says Zeh, right, when it refers to the Shemen HaMishcha, and Zeh means Zion is 7 and Hay is 5, and this is an allusion to the 12 lugim of Shemen that lasted and will last for all time. Omar Marafilu Kohen Gadol ben Kohen Gadol to Mashiach Minol, and how do you know that the son of the Kohen Gadol doesn't need Mashiach D'chsiv? V'Kohen HaMashiach Tachtov Mibanav Nema Krav HaKohen Tachtov Mibanav My HaMashiach. Why did he have to say the extra word HaMashiach? Just say he was Tachtov Mibanav, right? He was the Kohen, and now it's Tachtov Mibanav My Mashiach. The word Mashiach means that he was anointed. Mashmalan to be one of the Kohen Gadol, I Havi Mashiach, is then he's anointed with the Shemen HaMishcha, and then Havi Kohen Gadol. But if he doesn't have the anointment of the Kohen Gadol, Havi Kohen Gadol. Again, he could have Meruba Begadim, but not the special status of a Kohen Mashiach Mulchama, Mashiach, B'Shemen HaMishcha. Omar Marvei Moshe Melech ben Melech. How do we know that the Malchus is inherited from father to son? And that's indicative of the fact Yerusha Lachem, that Malchus lends itself to Yerusha. So the son inherits his father and inherits that Malchus from his father. He doesn't require any Mashiach B'Shemen HaMishcha. Except in the case where there's contention. Uminola and Dechi Ika Machlokas, if there's some contention as who will take over the monarchy. Boy Mashiach, we need Mashiach. V'lav kol boy Malcha Moris Malchus Lebnei. Right? A king can't automatically choose which of his sons will inherit his Malchus because there's, there are many claims for the Malchus. What's the source for this? Over a pop of a crow who bana b'kerev Yisrael bisman shalom b'Yisrael is then karina behu ubanav. Then we say that Malchus is b'Yerush. You don't need Mashiach. I feel below Mashiach. But if it's not shalom b'Yisrael, there's no harmony, but rather people are vying for the Malchus, like we'll see in the generation after David, but we have it throughout the Tanakh. Then we need Mashiach for the son of the Melech. Tana, we learned in a brisa, Af Yehu ben Nimshi lo nimshach el bnei machlokas shel Yoram v'tepikle mishum de Rishon. Why do you have to say because of machlokas? Maybe we should say that the reason why Yehu needed Mashiach is because he was not the oldest son, but rather Yehu was the oldest son. So when it answers Chisui Mechzok Tani, Malchus, Malchi Beis David Meshuchim, Malchi Yisrael, Eino Meshuchim. Yehu was one of the Malchi Yisrael, that means the exclusion of Yehuda Yomi, the 10 tribes, and therefore he did not need Mashiach. The only reason he needed Mashiach is because this guy named Yehoram, who was a little bit older than him and disputed him as far as who would be the Melech. I mean, no, and how do we know that Malchus Beis David needs Mashiach, but not Malchus Beis Yisrael? And Rava, the Yomakra, kum mishacheu ki zeh. Zeton Mashiach vein acher ton Mashiach. Just 1 second. What do you mean, Eina Acher Ton Mashiach? Just 1 second. Oh, Eina Acher, meaning someone who's not Zeh, meaning he's not from Beis David, doesn't require Mashiach because that's Malchus Beis Malchus Yisrael. I once learned a whole piece as to why Malchus Yisrael does not require Mashiach, but I don't remember what it was right now. Omar Mar. So we'll try to see if we can finish the Yomud. I know we're going overtime here, so if you have to go, you have to go. Af Yehu ben Nimshi lo Nimshach el Neimachlokosit shel Yoram Mishum Achlokosit shel Yoram ben Achav is therefore we're going to take the Shemen HaMishcha Nimol the Shemen HaMishcha. Shemen HaMishcha has the din of Hegdesh, and if you use the Hegdesh for something that's not obligatory, it's Me'ilah. So now, since he was a king of Yisrael, is Yehu was not supposed to, because Malchus Yisrael don't need Mashiach. But now we're saying, well, we're going to require Mashiach even for Malchus Yisrael, and Yehu is going to require Mashiach. Why? Because of his Machlokas Yom. So just because Yoram has a Machlokas, therefore we're going to use the Shemen HaMishcha, and that's a violation of Me'ilah. They fooled them. It wasn't really truly Mashiach. What they used was balsam. And the people thought that was Shemen HaMishcha, but it wasn't. So therefore, there's no me'ilah. Be'es Horyos mipnei Yoyakim shayagadol mimenu shtei shanim. Umi kashivin. Is it really true that Yoyakim was older than Yehoyachaz? Well, ksivu b'nei Yoshia b'char Yochanan Hasheni Yehoyakim. Hashlishi tzidkiyahu v'aravi shalem. Very strange because Omer Rabbi Yochanan, who Shalom, who Tzidkiyahu, who Yochanan, who Yoachaz. Very strange because it says second and third. Anyway, we see that Yoachaz was Yoshio's firstborn. Yoyakim was only the second son. So how can you tell me that Yoyakim was older? Liolam, Yoyakim Kash. Really, Yoyakim was older than Yehoyachaz. Umay Bechar, why does the Torah say that Yoyachaz was a Bechar? He was the first Bechar LeMalchus. He deserved the Malchus, even though the older one was Yoyakim. Umi Malche Zutre Mikamik Shisha. Can you really appoint a younger son as the king and skip over the older son Vaksiv? The pasuk says over here in Divrei Yomim, V'es hamamlocha nasan lihoram kihu habachar. Right, it's explicit here that the Bechar, the older son, gets precedence. So how could Yoyachaz rule before his older brother Yoyakim? And the answer is Yoyaram Amali Mokum Avosif. You can only be a king if you're a worthy replacement for your father, the king. Yoyakim lav Mamali Mokum Avosif Hav. Yoyakim was, although Yeshayahu was an unbelievable tzaddik, very tragic death, but Yoyakim did that which was evil in the eyes of God if he didn't deserve to employ his first rights as a Bechor and become the king. Omar Mar Hu Shalom Hu Tzidkiyo. How can Rabbi Yochanan say that Shalom is Tzidkiyo? Or Hu Yocham Hu Yoyachaz? I don't understand. It says Chad v'Chad Kochashim. The Torah says this is number one, this is number two, this is the third, this is the fourth. So obviously, if Tzidkiyo, according to Rabbi Yochanan Shalom, then how can you talk about the third son and the fourth son? The Gemara answers in favor of Rabbi Yochanan, my shlishi lebanin. Right, so Tzidkiyo, who's according to Rabbi Yochanan is Shalom, was the youngest of Melch Yeshayahu's sons. Umay Revi Malchus. He was fourth of Yeshayahu's descendants to ascend to the kingship. To make Korah first, Malach Yochas. Ulibsof, Yehoyakim. Ulibsof, and after him, Yechonya. And after him was Tzidkiyahu. Tzidkiyahu is very tragic. Tanarabana, we learned to the Baisa, Hu Shalom, Hu Tzidkiyahu. The Laman Ikra Shalom. Shahoyam Mushlam or Meshulam, but Maisav. He was perfect in his Maisav. Another Shalom, Shesholmo Malchus, Beis David. He was the last of the kings of Malchus, Beis David. Umayshmo, and he had a different name. What was his real name? Was Matanya, the gift of God, Shenemar. By Amlech Melech Bavelis Matanya Dodo Tachtov. Lo Nebuchadnezzar says to Tzidkiyahu, this is about the rebellion against the Babylonian kings. Say Yatzdik Olav Es Hadin Im Timrod Bi. In other words, if you rebel against me, then Nebuchadnezzar says that, by definition, you're going to justify God's judgment upon you, and I'm going to do what I have to do to you. Shenemar vayivi EU Bavel, right? So at the time of the goal is Bavel. Nebuchadnezzar brings Tzidkiyahu to Bavel. First, he gouges out his eyes. Uksiv v'gam b'melch Nebuchadnezzar morad asher ishbio elokim. So Tzidkiyahu leads a rebellion against Nebuchadnezzar, and that, of course, arouses Nebuchadnezzar's anger and precipitated the destruction of Yerushalayim and the Beis Hamikdash. And that leads us to Daf Yud Beis, which we'll have to learn over Shabbos, and then Yud Gimel on Sunday. And I think Yud Gimel, more or less, is the last daf in Seder Nezikin. There's a half a daf on Yud Daled. We'll sort of consider that as part of Yud Gimel. So many people on this Motzei Shabbos going into Sunday, which is Slichos, are making a siyum on all of Nezikin, which technically we could do, but we're not going to do. Because I'm too honest with myself. Anyway, all right, wishing you a great Shabbos. All too.